When I was a really young child growing up in Muskegon, Michigan, this would be the early 60s. I was born in 1957. My father had been sexually abusing me as far back as I can remember. And he often bragged of substituting his penis for my mother's nipple while I was an infant. So my sexuality was heightened from a very, very early age, and I also developed what is known as dissociative identity disorder. It was formerly termed multiple personality disorder, but has since been redefined because it's not multiple personalities, but the shattering of a personality and a compartmentalization of memory, of trauma, too horrible to comprehend. Childhood sexual abuse is certainly too horrible to comprehend. There was no place for that in my mind. This compartmentalization of memory was what the government was interested in, because they figured that if a person couldn't think to bring to mind abuse, they wouldn't be able to think to bring to mind government secrets, government perversions, or anything else they wanted compartmentalized in the brain. My experience as a mind control slave on a White House Pentagon level was extreme. I was totally robotic. I had no capacity to think for myself. I didn't have any free thought whatsoever. I didn't even have the ability to question, to reason, or consciously comprehend what I was involved in.
Happy birthday, Mr. Hefner. Happy birthday to you. I love you, Hef. You're amazing. You're 80, but you act like you're 20. You look like you're 40. You're hot. Love you.
Two players, two sides. One is light, one is dark.
I'm really not great with crowds or big groups of people or speaking, public speaking. I'm not great at
What happens to you when you
It's just you get anxious. I get very anxious. I don't know if that happens to you, but it's just something about being in front of that many people.
Heart pounding?
Yeah, I guess I black out. I never really remember how an interview went or how,
So you won't remember this interview in about 5 minutes?
Probably I'll black it out.
So I can ask anything,
Anything
or say
you want.
anything. Wow. You all are
5'1", 5 feet.
Can you stand up with me? Because when you walked in, my mouth dropped. Okay. We are both from the same species. I feel I came from a distant planet.
You're lucky. You have legs and...
Come on.
It's true.
was beautiful.